With the latest on the corporate front, all the market trends, expert opinion, and sound business advice. It is your unique window into the business world, direct from the heart of China.
Hello and welcome to Biz Today. I'm Zhao Yang in Beijing. China has set its GDP growth target for this year at around 5%. Premier Li Qiang announced the target in his government work report at the annual session of the National People's Congress. The report also outlines several other development goals, such as inflation and deficit to GDP ratio. He pledged support for developing new quality productive forces and artificial intelligence. The premier also said China would adopt a moderately loose monetary policy and issue ultra-long special treasury bonds to support the consumer trade-in programs. So what are the main focal points of this year's two sessions meetings? And why has China set its GDP target for this year at around 5%? And how will the country achieve that goal? For more on this, join us on the line now, Professor Li Qiang from Minzu University of China, Professor Liu Baocheng from the University of International Business and Economics, and also Yan Liang, Professor of Economics, Willamette University. So, Professor Li Qiang, I will start with you. What are your main takeaways from this year's government work report?
So I think the main takeaway from this, work report is that it's very comprehensive. It concerning many, important aspects. For example, the GDP growth target, the fiscal policy, technology breakthrough, the domestic consumption, and job market. So I think this work report are trying its best to cover every important factors that everybody are paying attention to. And I think this is very, very reasonable and also very confident. It is setting up, very good target, like the 5% of GDP growth, 2% of the CPI, as well as for the job market, for increasing people's the treatment in a social benefit, and also try to, bring up more of the supportive packages to help Chinese enterprises to sustain their technology R&D and a breakthrough, and also try to support the ordinary household for the consumptions. So I think through this report we can find many important trail that be leading us towards the 15th five-year program, which is going to start next year, and also giving us lots of the guideline to look into how the government is going to perform for the next 5 years. And many of these policies will guide us in investment, in setting up our businesses, and help the ordinary household to have a clear understanding of the general situation and be more confident about the years to come.
And Professor Liu, actually China has set its GDP growth target for this year at around 5%. Why is this target?
This target is realistic in that over the past year's performance, for example, from 5.2 to 5%, this is something that's they're allied with Chinese economic reality, and also to move along with more consistency to achieve our centennial goal, and also to usher in the growth prospect for the Chinese economy. They are also taking into consideration of the Chinese continued government policy support, the industrial transformation, and also the recovery of the domestic consumption, real estate sector, etc. So it is feasible, but in the meanwhile, it is also challenging given some of the external shocks because China is heavily dependent on the global marketplace, which is now getting more and more unpredictable. And also we need to balance the long-term growth rate and maintain a subtle precaution in how much we can really borrow from the future by issuing the number of long-term bonds, etc. It is there, in a way, ambitious, but also realistic.
And Yan, so the report has set its deficit to GDP ratio at around 4%, and this is from last year's 3%. And at the same time, there will be ultra-long special bonds of 1.3 trillion plus 300 billion yuan earmarked for the consumer goods upgrades program, the trade-in. And there is also monetary policy. We are seeing the change from being prudent to moderately loose, the change like, more than 10 years for the first time. So how strong are all these supportive policies in terms of economic growth?
Well, I think the fiscal expansion is very critical. I think this idea of raising the headline deficit to GDP ratio from 3% to 4%, that is going to help increase the fiscal deficit spending by another 1.6 trillion yuan. And as you mentioned, there's the government special bonds and also the local government bond issuance quota has also been increased by 500 billion yuan to reach 4.4 trillion yuan. So altogether, the increase in the new government debt would be 11.86 trillion yuan, which is about 2.9 trillion yuan higher than last year. So I think it is critical in a number of ways. And I agree that there are some concerns about this large amount of debt, but I think it is necessary given the current growth trajectory and also given the economic transition that we're abandoning the old way of growth, which is investment driven, especially in the real estate sector. So we need to boost domestic demand, which means the government needs to support the domestic consumption demand, but also try to improve investment returns. So that means the government needs to increase its fiscal support for the economy. Not to mention, I think a lot of these special bond issuance is going to help to stabilize the property market, as well as local government debt and finances. So I think these are necessary. And I think if the debt is used in a productive way, it's going to help to propel economic growth and help to improve the economic structure to cultivate more new productive, high quality productive forces. Especially now, I think the government is double down on the support in the private sector, especially in the tech sector. So I think these deficit spending is going to be used in a productive way, and that will help the economy even in the long term.
And Professor Li Qiang, so the deficit to GDP ratio will be around 4%. So how do you view this increase?
I think China can afford to do so, especially against the current situation. We need to have this unconventional, counter-cyclical, policies to fight against this, headwind, like the central government has already mentioned at the end of the last year, to say that we need to pull off some very strong tools, to counter all this negative impact. I think this is very, very good. And also, I think the capital market has been feeding back very positively towards the change because they welcome this. They think this is the right thing to do.
Well, Yan, the report has also outlined major tasks for this year. It says China will boost the consumption and stimulate the domestic demand across the board. So what have been done and what could be done further to boost the domestic consumption, do you think?
Well, I think the government's work report talked about 10 different measures to boost consumption. So first and foremost is to increase the ability for consumers to spend. And there will be improvements in terms of the kinds of services, the products that will be available, and also improve the environment for consumption. But I think the more important things are, for example, use many channels to improve the income growth of the Chinese people, especially for the middle income or low income families. There need to be more mechanisms for them to be able to grow their income. And also, I think on the fiscal front, there will be the long duration, ultra long duration bonds, as you just mentioned, the 300 billion yuan to support a trade-in program, which has been pretty successful last year. There are also other measures such as improve the services sector, especially healthcare, elderly care, childcare, and so on. But I think there's also some indirect measures that we should not ignore. For example, if the property market gets more support through the special bond issuance that allow the local governments to destock the inventories, to help to stabilize the housing market, then I think that would also improve the positive wealth effect, as we know that the housing market is where 60-70% household wealth resides. So if the property market stabilizes, this is going to boost the confidence. Other measures that support the equity market, right, the stock market rally, that would also boost in terms of wealth and also confidence. Not to mention other measures that are going to help job creations and so on. So I think in a way, it's a very holistic approach to stimulate consumption because this is a very complex system, right? It's not that you just give a little bit cash hangouts and people are going to spend in a continuous way. So it does take multiple dimensional measures to be able to boost income, confidence, wealth, and the consumption environment in order to be able to really bolster domestic consumer demand.
And Professor Li Qiang, so Yan mentioned about the job market of this, creation of 12 million jobs for this year. And some say the 5% or around 5% economic growth is necessary in order to create that number of 12 million jobs every year. So why 12 million? Why is this number important?
Well, you have to understand that the 12 million, population or increased new job is trying to correspond with the newly graduate of each year to come. For example, this year in 2025, we're going to face 12 million newly graduate from the universities and all kinds of vocational colleges. And when they enter the market, they need jobs. And according to our estimation in the past 10 years, so every 1% of the GDP growth probably will equal to over 2 million jobs. So basically, with the sheer value or sheer size of Chinese GDP are growing. So 5% of the growth based on the last year, which means can be translated into 12 million jobs or 13 million jobs, which is very important to absorb all this newly graduate students into the job market to maintain the stability and also the income level of the whole population. And that's the reason why we're doing so. And I think this is also like Professor Li Qiang and also Yan Liang has mentioned. I think it's a very reasonable number. It is because China actually has been very successfully shifted its economic structures from the labor-intensive industry, sheer export-oriented industry, and also based on the real estate market, now to be leading by the high technology, international supply chain, as well as for the service sectors. Especially for the service sectors, it's very important sponge to absorb a large quantity of the labor forces. So I think this booming of the tourism industry, culture industry, as well as for the other education industry can actually provide the job we needed. And also this kind of the newly increased job is different from what we have seen in 10 years, because these are high added value, high salary jobs, and with more flexibilities. So I think this target has been very well and very reasonably calculated and can be achieved in the next year.
So we also mentioned about this high-tech sector, the AI, 6G in particularly, AI-powered mobile phones, robots, etc. So do you think the application of these AI technologies will work as a new drivers for the economic growth?
Well, I think so. I think that as we know that China has made really breakthrough progress in the AI. So in the work report, Li Qiang specifically mentioned about the AI plus strategy. So this idea that now that we have this very powerful AI tools and it's open sourced, it can be quickly and also widely integrated and applied to some of the traditional industries like manufacturing, but also services, right? In terms of healthcare, education, logistics, you name it. So there's a lot of potent uses of AI to boost productivity. And I think this is important for China's new quality productive forces to be able to not only cultivate these cutting edge technologies, but really to apply these technologies to boost the total factor productivity. And you're right, it's not just AI, but there are many other biotech, quantum computing, 6G, all this idea is to accelerate digitalization, but also improve, new energies, new materials, and these green technologies. And so all of these are going to, again, try to boost the productivity growth. And that is the key, as now China can no longer rely on the extensive input growth, such as capital and labor. So it needs to rely more on productivity growth. And I definitely think that China has built a very coherent and also powerful ecosystem in these new tech industries, and that it's not only optimized by AI, right, in terms of DeepSeek or robotics, like Unitree's humanoid robots, but also in many other sectors, which I think Li Qiang specifically mentioned about EVs and battery storage technologies and so on and so forth. So I think, yeah, this is the right direction to modernize industries. This is continue to be a major task, I think, for the government to continue to support.
And Professor Li Qiang, so the private sector contributes for more than 60% of China's GDP and more than 80% of the urban employment. And one key focus, speeding up the legislation to promote China's private sector. So what do you think are the role that the private sector is playing in terms of strengthening China's innovation and boosting the consumption?
Well, I think everybody understands the private sector's role in our overall economy. So they've been creating more than 80% of the jobs, and the private sector is the main contributors and investors in the technology breakthrough. Just take a look at the current blockbuster, the Naja, the movie, and also our breakthrough in AI, the DeepSeek. Meanwhile, we have the Black Myth Wukong, a very important phenomenon games, they be all created by the private sectors and they become the inspiration for the younger generations and they give us so much of the confidence in the year we just began. So I think acknowledge their contribution and role, and also feedback and be supportive to their roles is very important in the next 5 years. And I think it's going to be very important part in the 15th five-year program. We need to see that they are being facing, certain challenges in the development. For example, the legal protection, the rule of law system towards the private sector is still not very mature. And meanwhile, about financial access, many of the technologies are more like the unitary technology. They've been starting from a very, very poor conditions. They need the government and they need the whole society to give them the support. I think that's the reason why this legislation, this financial statement made by the premier, saying that the financial support and fiscal support need to face the 5 most important aspects to support them. So I think if we can really manage that in the next 5 years, we're going to see a major mushrooming, booming, phenomenon of the private sectors, and more of the surprises and amazing result, like another DeepSeek, like another movie of the Naja, like another breakthrough in technology will pop out, definitely.
And Professor Liu Baocheng, so for China's economy, we also want to talk about the external challenge. The Trump's tariffs on Chinese exports on many other parts of the world too, European countries included. So how big a challenge is that to Chinese economic growth?
Because China is heavily dependent on the external market, both for supply of raw materials and also export of our final products as a big manufacturing hub. On one hand, China's growth contributes to roughly 30% of the whole world growth. On the other, we face a number of external shocks. The high tariff from the United States and trade restrictions with regard to high-tech the equipments and technology are the one. And the other is that the world is going to be reshaped with different type of trade blocks. And that is also why China, in terms of the national strategy, we're strengthening more on boosting our domestic consumption in order to mitigate the external shocks. But in the meanwhile, we are forging more of regional alliances in trade and economic ties, particularly the strengthening our cooperation with the ASEAN countries as an important member of regional comprehensive economic partnership. We are also taking initiative to build more of the bilateral free trade agreements with many other the global South countries. And now the more of the hope is better on how we can really boost the Chinese industrial might with more innovation so that we are able to have more added value and we are get more indispensable in global marketplace, even within the United States. And the other is that the Chinese business communities are also being adaptive to such a sort of new situation. So that is why you notice last year our outbound investment has very much increased by more than 12%, which means that they are also seeking for the right type of places to relocate their production in order to penetrate into a more profitable marketplace. So all in all, I could see that China is getting more and more prepared with this, their strategy, and businesses are getting more agile into new opportunities, and with more of diversification and strengthening our own domestic economy, both at the consumption and production level, we are able to weather those shock waves.
And Yan, so how do you think, how can China's efforts to boost the consumption and boost the technological advancement offset the external uncertainties, such as the U.S. tariffs?
Well, I think, first of all, the Chinese dependent on the U.S. market is, at least, the direct exposure has been declining over time. So when you look at China's exports to the United States, now it's only 14.6% of China's total exports. And at the same time, the net exports that China has with the United States is only 1.57% of its GDP. So in a way, I think we're less and less dependent on the US market. And so that gives China a really strong foothold to be able to guard its economy against any of these external shocks. And as Professor Liu talked about, that China now is making a lot more trade partners with the global south, with ASEAN countries, that is even more important as a trade partner than the United States. So I think just to put that in context, at the same time, I think it is true that domestic consumption demand is under some sort of stress. And again, I think that has to do with the COVID effect, but also has to do with the property market correction. So policies need to be in place to support the consumer sentiment, to boost income and consumption environment, to boost consumption demand. On the other hand, I think the supply side, this idea that we need to transform the economy to be greener and also more productive, I think it's really the right call, because that is important to create jobs, to create skilled jobs to support higher income, but also to be able to provide quality products to satisfy consumer demand. But it's also very important, as I mentioned earlier, to drive that quality growth, right, in terms of productivity, in terms of sustainability. So I think these two are, they actually build up very good synergy, one from the demand side to boost, consumer demand, and then also from the supply side to have the tech innovation, productivity-driven growth. So I think that would serve China's long-term growth very well.
So, Professor Li Qiang, there are also some new phrases being mentioned in this year's government work report. And there is also one point that the strength of the stabilization of the stock market and the property market. So why is emphasis or stress on this?
Well, it's a very good question. Against a lot of people's intuition that when we're saying that we need to stabilize our real economy so that property market and the stock market can also be stabilized after that. But actually it is wrong, because modern economy is quite different from the previous, economy. Because right now we've been thinking that the real economy is a reflection of the financial market, which means when you can stabilize the property market and also the stock market first, and then your real economy will gain good expectation and confidence, and then try to grow back on the right track. So the expectations and the confidence from the financial market, and then how much you can borrow based on the evaluation of your assets value, can actually decide the household and enterprises, the future performances and development in the real economy.
And Yan, so the report also emphasized fostering new quality productive forces with industries like quantum technology, low altitude economy, and AI integrated manufacturing. So how transformative could these factors be for China's economy?
Well, I think all these technologies are very sort of general purpose technologies. So when it comes to quantum computing, 6G, and digital technologies, these can all be applied in traditional industries such as manufacturing, but they're also able to be integrated into service sectors, right? Like healthcare, like education or logistics, transportation, tourism, you name it. So I think, these technologies, once they're being integrated and applied in a cost-effective but also large scale, this is going to help to boost productivity growth. So we're seeing, the mushrooming of the so-called smart factories in China. So that not only help to, accelerate the product cycle, but also help to save energies and boost production capacity and productivity. So I think this is really helpful to boost the not only the in terms of the total output, but more importantly, I think the value added. And I think there's also many initiatives they're trying to promote, the low altitude economy, commercial airspace, EVs, of course, and some of the smart electronics and smart homes, and new energies, new materials, and so on and so forth. So I think a lot of critiques used to say that China doesn't know how to innovate, but now I think that myth has been debunked, right? China, especially the private entrepreneurs, they are very capable of innovating. But now I think there are also skeptics that says, well, yes, China has all these green shoots of technological innovations, but they're not going to be able to, boost the entire economy. But I think, again, that is a myth that is going to be debunked. We can clearly see right now that DeepSeek, with its cost effectiveness and also open source technology, it can be very quickly applied. As a matter of fact, I think right now China has 190 large language models and 4,500 companies and still counting are integrated these in their services, in their products. So I think it is clear that China is able to innovate, but also use the innovations to boost its broader economy and have that, new quality productive forces driving economy forward.
Well, we're speaking with Yan Liang, Professor of Economics, Willamette University, Professor Liu Baocheng from the University of International Business and Economics, and also Professor Li Qiang from Minzu University of China. And that's all the time we have for this edition of Biz Today. I'm Zhao Yang in Beijing. Thank you so much for listening.